Okay, let's try to break this down with an expert who can talk about this, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University. Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Joseph, good morning to you. And I want to get started right now. So in your experience, you have dealt with police reports a lot. What do you make of this idea that he was telling the investigator from the medical examiner's office, allegedly saying that Laquan McDonald lunged at the officer, which we all know really wasn't the case?
Yeah, in that moment in time, and kind of let me set the stage here relative to how this works. There would be an initial report of the death that took place to the ME investigator, and then anything else that's subsequent to that initial report would be a supplementary report. In this particular case, he's having a direct interview with March. He's gathering facts here so that he can give this back to the pathologist that's going to do the autopsy. So, and it's very convoluted on the surface, but this is the key, Jesse. In cases involving deaths, the ME/coroner, we are held to the standard of we are objective in our view of what happens. We're not married to the police. We're not married to the defense. We simply state the facts as we see them from a scientific perspective. And we have to have all of this information, non-prejudicial. It's just you lay it out. And the fact that he made this statement, March at least, to this to Briggs, is very significant because he's going to write it down, he's going to pass it along, and there's a real conflict.
So when do you question those reports and say, well, something doesn't add up?
Well, when, and again, was the ME investigator physically out on the scene at this particular time? More than likely not, and so all he can do is go with what the police are telling him at that moment in time. And then when they get this body back to the ME's office and they see that this fellow has been shot 16 times, that's going to cause, a light bulb to go off over their head.
Yeah.
Is this sufficient? Was this sufficient to the force that you were meeting at that particular time? And that's something that's going to come into question here.
Oh, it definitely will. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we have more of the testimony of Earl Briggs. We'll be right back. Okay, so the defense attorney for David March is really grilling Earl Briggs about whether or not Mr. March was the one who made that statement. I want to try to get a better analysis of this. So joining us back from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan's back with us. So Joseph, I got to ask you, an investigator from the medical examiner's office saying what the protocol is, who receives the phone calls, is it possible that maybe David March really didn't make this statement? Was something improper done? And you heard what the defense attorney was trying to argue here.
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a reach. Why would somebody call in posing as March to the ME's office? I don't know. I guess they're trying to put the onus on someone else here. But it is, he's talking about procedural issues relative to, is the ME's office always manned? Is there someone there to take a call? Yes, yes, and yes. And let's keep in mind, Jesse, we're talking about Cook County here. This is one of the busiest ME offices in the nation. They deal with thousands and thousands of deaths every year, not just homicides, but every death that occurs that fits within the construct of death investigation and what they're tasked with doing in Cook County. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes it can, I had friends that worked up there. Sometimes I'm sure that it looks like a tidal wave coming at you. There would have been other cases he dealt with on this particular night. So, they're having to rely on this direct questioning of this gentleman as far as what he recalls at that point in time. My question, I think, here is, did he take any ancillary notes? Because, as you know, notebooks, notes, these written statements or written comments that you make, they're all subject to subpoena as well. And I'm really wondering if he did have a running list of things, because, sometimes it's very it has its own flow. You know, you're just kind of jotting things down. I've been in court, and they, you know, I use my own shorthand, and they'll ask me, you know, what does this mean? What is this? What does this mean? And this sort of thing. And I would write in kind of a script that only I understood. So wherever I went, wherever my notebook went, I went, because I had to kind of interpret it. Sometimes these things are done on the fly. And in this particular case, this is essential because, you know, when you look at it, when you begin to deconstruct this thing, the ME is the one objective person in this particular case that doesn't necessarily have a dog in the fight here. They're just simply looking for answers. So they're not, you know, necessarily privy to any kind of nefarious behavior that's going on. And what is essential here, Jesse, is I'm really surprised that this guy is stating that he did not go to the scene. I'm absolutely amazed by that. We're talking about a police shooting. He's not out there. That really draws us into question for me.
One of the things that we're trying to determine is what is the role of everybody who was involved in this investigation, including this witness itself. But this was a big moment in the courtroom, and obviously there were a lot of big moments that we have to talk about. But we have to take a quick break. When we come back, as you can imagine, we have a lot more to discuss. We'll be right back. What we see are three different styles, three different kinds of arguments, but there's one underlying theme. They want this judge, because there's no jury, to rule that these three men are not guilty of official misconduct or obstruction of justice or conspiracy. And that's what I want to touch upon right now with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, the idea of conspiracy, you and I were talking a little bit about it before we went on the air today, about trying to say, hey, we're going to get all these reports to look the same. We're going to work together and make sure that we use similar language. We're going to make sure that we don't want to, we want to protect Jason Van Dyke. You were explaining a little bit about whether or not that's what's the practicality of that actually happening? How difficult is it to show that kind of conspiracy? Because again, you have been involved with reviewing countless police reports, correct?
Yeah, I have, and not to mention, you know, supervising an 11-person staff at the medical examiner's office. And yeah, it's a daunting task. You know, when I sit here and I think about this idea of, we'll just go to conspiracy, these individuals would have to have entered into an agreement that the wording is going to be the same, or at least in the same ballpark, that we're going to, you know, nudge this in one particular direction. That's kind of going to be the rattle and hum of our reports. And it's a it's a multi-layered kind of event. And think about this, Jesse. This is not something that occurs over a long period of time. This is something that would have had to have happened in the immediate, and they would have had to have been on the same sheet of music. And it's all about perception. You know, the defense attorneys are talking about this. You know, what is their perception of their reality? And just because you don't agree with with the reports, that doesn't mean that there's anything nefarious with the report. It just means that you don't agree with it. One salient point that he was kind of making was, you know, the one defense attorney, I can't remember which one, but he was talking about how the aggressor had the knife up in the air back to the point back prior to them entering into frame. And we don't know what happened outside of frame. We don't know what those motions were. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, as we did in the earlier trial, was there an imminent threat? You know, and if there wasn't, if that was their perception that there was no imminent threat, this makes this all the more complicated.
Let's break this down for a second. So yes, you talked about perception. One of the things we have here, though, and we're playing it right now, is the Dashcam footage, right?
Yes.
Are you saying that there is something that we might not see in this footage that these officers are saying that they saw? I mean, because it looks pretty straightforward when you look at it.
Yeah, it does, but I don't know what happened prior to this young man coming into frame, and so did that impact their perception of it, or did they say, wow, this is really overkill, and we need to go back and cover our bases? Because, you know, you still have to deal with the physical evidence that you're looking at. This guy was shot 16 times, Jesse. 16 times. And in my perception, we talked about this initially in the first trial. This guy is tracking, it appears to me, is tracking away from them when he is shot. He is not approaching them. He's not being an aggressor. But again, what had happened prior to their interaction with him before he actually comes into frame? You know, we have this image that we're seeing right now of the unit rolling in. We have a rear view of him and this sort of thing. What had happened prior to this, you know, this escalation of force that had brought it to this point? And, you know, that has to be addressed.
Yeah, I want to get back, because one of the things that we're doing is we're not only reviewing what happened in the last few days in this cop cover-up trial, but we're also reviewing it in relation to the testimony from the Jason Van Dyke trial. And Joseph, I want you to see when Jason Van Dyke, really the whole forefront of this whole case, he took the stand in his own defense. Let's see what he had to say several months back about this shooting. Take a look. All right, let's get some reaction to this. Joseph, you might have remembered this when he testified, but let's review it. The idea of looking at that simulation kind of looks like a video game right there. Are these kinds of examples accurate to depict what really happened at a shooting, or is there something missing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit dehumanizing. I think, you know, he's talking about it being at eye level, his eye level, as opposed to this kind of bird's eye perspective that it gives, where it rises, you know, rises above the top of his head, and I think that's what he's addressing. And also the other thing that again, it goes back to perception. What was his perception at the time? And keep in mind, Jesse, and we talk about this a lot in these kinds of cases, the expectation of that the courts and that the law has for police officers as opposed to a civilian who is facing imminent threat are completely different. You know, we talk about the escalation of force and their perception. They're put through stressful training in order to be reactive toward that event that is headed their way. So that holds him to a different standard than, say, if this was a home invasion kind of event. I think the question, you know, at that time that we had to ask, was this a reasonable response to the threat, to his perception of the threat? And it's all very, very confusing at this point in time. I can tell you that on that recreation, I don't see this young fellow raising the knife as if in a threatening manner. But again, this is one little clip. We don't know what's happened back up the road at that point in time, and this is his perception at this point in time. We don't know about the radio chatter and what's going on internally with him, what's being said by the other officers that are surrounding him at this point in time, because you got people that are screaming orders there. It's the situation is markedly ramped up in this particular event.
Strangely enough, so we didn't think that this trial of the three officers was going to be so much about use of justifiable force or not. But yesterday in court, that's really what the discussion became. But I want to go back to the idea of what Jason Van Dyke said and how that was captured in the report of one of the defendants. And we know that Joseph Perfetti, from the Record Services Division of the Chicago Police Department, he was called on the stand, I think the first day, to talk about these reports, whether or not they were falsified or not. And I want you to listen very carefully to how some of those details were captured in those reports. Take a look. Okay, I want to get a quick reaction, if I can, from Joseph. Joseph, the idea of what Jason Van Dyke said was now captured in this official report. Thoughts? It
is captured at that moment in time, and it's kind of interesting to hear it from this guy with the Records Division and how it's being trotted out relative to what his perception is. Again, we go back to the knife up to the chest and then raised, and we just don't see that either in the video itself that we were watching, or of course the crime scene reconstruction, digital reconstruction that we saw. And so I don't know, does it muddy the waters even further, or does it clarify things? And at the end of the day, Van Dyke has been found guilty at this point. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what role did March play in these other officers that are writing the reports? Did they have sufficient amount of time to enter into a conspiracy in this event? And that's going to be, the seminal question at the end of the day, and that's what all of this is going to rest upon.
I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the faces of the defendants. It's almost as if they're in shock as to where they are. I mean, this really is an unbelievable case. But what's more unbelievable is listening to the details of it, specifically David March, how he may have made that alleged statement to the investigator, the medical examiner's office, that false statement about Laquan McDonald lunging, reading the reports, how they contain information that's just arguably not true. And this is a fascinating case to study. We're going to be back live in that courtroom in 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll also be covering 2 other live trials today, 2 feeds in 2 different courtrooms. So we have a very busy day in the courtroom. We are going to take a quick break on our end right now. But when we come back, as you can imagine here on Law and Crime, we have a lot to discuss. We'll be right back.
Here in the library.
Death in this particular case is actually manual strangulation, which of course means that she was essentially choked to death, and which makes this, as I like to frame it, a very personal event. You generally see these in cases involving intimates, as you will, if you will. Another significant finding here in the autopsy record is the fact that her body was found in a shallow grave, in a very contracted position, which means that kind of drawn up, laying on her side, very, very shallow, covered over. What's so important about this is that when the body is examined, the body is laid out on the table in the morgue, postmortem lividity, which is the settling and pooling of blood, is all oriented anteriorly, which means on the front of the body. It's very basic science. What this means is that blood would have to settle to the lowest point of gravity. So that means that for at least, and it was fixed, that's essential. What that means in this young lady's death or with her body, is that she lay in a position where she is face down, and according to the report, stretched out for probably about 10 to 12 hours before she was extricated from that position and then moved to her burial spot. So that means, in my mind, at least as an investigator, I'm thinking, well, someone over that period of time is waiting for an opportunity either to remove the body by stealth or trying to determine what are we going to do with the body, because in these impassioned cases, many times you'll find that the perpetrator will kill, and then suddenly they come to this moment of clarity where they say, oh my gosh, I've got to do something with the body. In this particular case, we're talking about a body that has laid in a prone position, face down, for a protracted period of time, and then the body has been moved. This lividity was fixed. That means that it had laid there for an extended period of time. She had laid there for an extended period of time before they actually moved the body to be buried.
And the main question is, was it Adnan Syed? That's what we all want to know. Let's take a quick break.
That's the question you have to ask.
Yeah, let's take a quick break, Joseph, and when we come back, we'll be back live in the courtroom. Okay, so really interesting legal issues happening here, all determining whether or not Mr. Syed will be granted a new trial, and ultimately, if he's found not guilty, he could be released from prison. This is a really big situation, really big development. And the argument that's currently underway is whether or not his former lawyer, Ms. Gutierrez, who's since passed on, did she violate his Sixth Amendment right to effective assistance of counsel basically by failing to interview this alibi witness? And you hear this back and forth between the state and the defense counsel about this issue, and really poignant and straightforward questions by the judges about this very issue. We also believe they're going to ask about a different issue in terms of the challenge to cell phone tower location data being used at this trial and whether or not it's reliable or not. I want to bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University. Joseph, you talked a little bit more, and I want to elaborate on about the condition of Heyman Lee. Again, this is the victim here who died in 1999, and Mr. Syed has been on, he's been in prison ever since for her murder. You talked about the killing maybe done by it had an intimate nature to it. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. This is not something that was done or perpetrated at a distance, say, for instance, where someone takes a gunshot from 10 feet away. This is up close and personal. This is someone most likely atop this young girl with their hands, their fingers clutched around her throat, choking the life out of her. This is manual strangulation. This isn't even, a bludgeoning death. This is having to look potentially into the eyes of the individual as they are, as oxygen is being cut off from their body. A very horrific scene. And most of the time with personal events like this, there's anger that's involved. You don't just have this as kind of a random event most of the time that occurs, in my experience at least. This is going to be something that has very intimate nature to it, where you're in their space. You're trying, the perpetrator may be trying to make a point of dominance here in an asymmetrical relationship between the two physically. It's quite striking.
Yeah, and the question becomes, we keep asking whether or not Adnan Syed, again, this was the boyfriend of Heyman Lee, is he the one who did this? That became the question of the Serial podcast that everybody listened to, and right now is a huge development happening in the Maryland Court of Appeals. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to jump live there. These are very important issues that are being decided, and it could ultimately determine the fate of this man. We'll be right back. All right, let's break out a second and go talk to Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University. Joseph, my question to you is about the cell phone evidence. The reliability of that cell phone evidence becomes an issue in this appeal as well. And the defense wants to question whether or not these towers that were present back in 1999, is that even reliable data to look at and pinpoint his location where he was? What do you think about that issue?
Yeah, just like with all technology, Jesse, we can all, maybe think back to 1999 and think about what kind of cell phone technology that we all had personally. And we have to assume that, that technology has also evolved since that point in time. So this will be drawn up as a point of order. This is a densely populated area that he was moving about in, and they have multiple cell phone tower pings off of his location moving around. And time is a critical element here, Jesse, isn't it? Because they're talking about alibi. And he's not just talking about a statement. He's actually talking about places, right, these locations that he occupied, the library. All these sorts of things are critical.
So critical, and each issue is important for this Maryland Court of Appeals to decide. Joseph, I know we have to sign you off. Thanks so much for coming on today and talking about all the various cases.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll jump live in that courtroom and talk about this alibi witness. We'll be right back.